Every hunter knows that every time you go into the woods, there's multiple dangers that you need to be aware of, whether it's wildlife, weather, terrain. However, every once in a while, the most dangerous thing that a hunter could come across in the woods is another person. And today I'm going to share with you a story that depicts exactly that. But before we get into today's encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you would like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you're heading out to deer camp, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. In the fall of 2002, brothers Nick and Evan were looking forward to the start of archery whitetail season up in northeastern Saskatchewan. Nick and Evan grew up in Saskatoon, which is a city located in central Saskatchewan, and they had grown up hunting mule deer and whitetail deer with their father and with their uncles growing up. However, this year was going to be extra special for these two brothers. For several years prior, they had been saving as much money as they could, pooling it together, and that spring they had purchased a section of property out by Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, which is about 340 kilometers from Saskatoon, and it was 160 acres. This would be their first year hunting this property. The brothers were absolutely ecstatic for this hunt, to hunt for the very first time on their own private property. This property was pretty much strictly bush, but the brothers saw a lot of potential in it. See, up in northern Saskatchewan, the whitetail deer hunting is absolutely phenomenal for world-class trophy bucks, and every year countless trophy bucks get harvested up in northern Saskatchewan, and that's what had drawn these brothers to this particular piece of property. And they figured with the right amount of work, the right strategy, they would be able to turn this parcel of land into a whitetail deer hunter's paradise. They had spent pretty much every weekend from spring up until the end of summer working on the property. They were clear bush. They brought out an old bowler trailer. They had that set up where they would be camping in that every time they went out to the property. They built a shop. It wasn't much. It was about 10 feet by 10 feet with about 10-foot high ceilings. And that's where they would hang their game and process them. So these brothers were absolutely looking forward to this season. When the season finally started, both brothers took 2 weeks off of work. They loaded all their gear into the back of Nick's truck, hooked up the quad trailer, and then they made that 3.5-hour drive to Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan. When they got to Hudson Bay, they headed south for about 20-25 minutes, making their way down this gravel road. After driving for about 20-25 minutes, they could see up ahead on the road on the left this small drive heading off into the trees. And that was a driveway that they had created to their camp on their property. Once they got to that drive, they turned off the gravel road. They were finally at their property for their first ever deer hunt on their own private property. When the trailer came into sight, both brothers gave each other a high five. They pulled the truck over to the side, and then they spent the next couple of hours just unloading Nick's truck, putting whatever they could inside the trailer. A lot of stuff would not fit just because this trailer was not very big, so a lot of stuff had to stay inside of Nick's truck. And then they spent the rest of the evening just talking about where they were going to hunt the next morning, and basically just spent some time enjoying each other's company and enjoying being out on their property. The next morning they woke up at zero dark. They got up, they had some food, put on their camo, grabbed their bows, and they made their way out of the trailer towards where they were going to hunt for the day. The spot that Ethan had picked to hunt the night before was located on the far side of the property, about 3/4 of a mile away from the trailer. So that morning he would be using the quad. So once he got outside, he fist pumped his brother, made his way to the quad, fired it up, let it warm up for a couple of minutes, hopped on, and then he started making his way towards his stand. To get to his stand, he had to go down this little narrow quad trail that him and his brother had made over the summer. And when he finally got to where his tree stand was, he pulled the quad off to the side, tucked it off into the bush, grabbed his bow, grabbed his pack, and then made his way towards his tree stand. He had built a 12-foot tall wooden ladder stand up against this big giant poplar tree. And when he got to the stand, he started making his way up that wooden ladder. He made it about halfway up when all of a sudden one of the rungs came loose from the ladder, and he ended up falling directly onto his back on the ground on top of his bow. When he stood up, managed to kind of collect himself, He pulled out his flashlight, shone it down on the ground, was kind of gathering up all of his stuff. He noticed that when he fell on his bow, he actually damaged one of the cams. So his bow was going to be completely useless now. He would need to get his bow into a bow shop or get another bow. Even though Ethan was incredibly ticked off at this point, he figured, you know what, if I fire the quad back up and go back to the trailer, I'm more than likely going to mess up Nick's hunt. So he decided he was just going to sit at the base of that stand for the morning and just basically watch and see if he saw anything at all. As the morning progressed, he just kept thinking about what he was going to do about this situation. He had no bow, he was out here for 2 weeks, and he knew that he would need to either head back into Saskatoon to get a new bow or take his bow to a bow shop and hope that they had a replacement cam for it. So that kind of stewed in him all morning, and it just kind of kept bringing up a lot of anger, but he tried to brush all that off and just enjoy being out in the woods. At about 11:30, he figured, you know what, Nick's more than likely back at the trailer now, so he fired up the quad and made his way back to go meet with his brother. When he finally met back up with Nick, he told him exactly what had happened, and Nick said, you know what, we're out here for 2 weeks. I have no problem at all going back to town so we could get your bow fixed or get a new bow. But then Nick said, but you know what, if we both go, we're going to have to load everything back into the truck. We're going to have to unload everything when we get back. So why don't you stay here, watch over everything. I'll head back to town and deal with the bow issue for you. So Ethan said, you know what? Yeah, that's a good idea. If you don't mind, yeah, I'll stay here. I'll watch over everything. See, Ethan did not have a valid driver's license, so he could not take Nick's truck back to town. So Nick said, okay, you know what, though? It's already, noon-ish already. By the time I get back to Saskatoon, deal with the bow, and then come back out, that's a lot of driving. I'm going to be looking at driving for like 7.5, 8 hours. So why don't I just head back out tomorrow morning? Will you be okay overnight by yourself? And Ethan said, yeah, you know what, I'll be fine. I've spent nights in the bush by myself in a tent. I'm in a trailer. I'm on our own property. Yeah, I'm good. Not a problem. So after about a half an hour of kind of getting his stuff put away, Nick waved goodbye to Ethan, hopped in the truck, and made his way back to Saskatoon. Ethan pretty much spent the rest of the day just going to their various trail cam locations, pulling the SD cards, putting new ones in. And that evening, once he was back at the trailer, he made himself a fire, made some hot dogs, and at around 10 o'clock, he headed into the trailer to try to call it a night. Once he was in the trailer, he was having a very hard time falling asleep. It was really hot and really musty. Even with the windows open, there was just hardly any airflow at all, and he was having a really hard time getting comfortable. Finally, sometime around 12:30, he slowly started to doze off, when all of a sudden he was awoken by the sound of something moving through the bush on the side of the trailer. He kind of lied there for a minute, just kind of listening out this small window, trying to figure out what he just heard, if it was the wind, if maybe it was a squirrel or rabbit. And then he could hear that whatever was moving outside, there was actually two of them, because he could hear them at two different spots. He could hear one further towards the back of the trailer and one closer up to the front of the trailer. At this point, he's still lying there kind of trying to figure out what he's listening to. And then he could hear people talking. It was like a soft whisper. He could not make out what they were saying, but he could definitely tell this was human voices, and there were definitely two of them. He could hear them whispering back and forth. Ethan instantly sat up at high alert, listening to these two people outside of the trailer, and he could hear one of them moving around the backside and the other one moving around the front. He sat there listening, and he could hear both of them making their way along the side of the trailer till they were right in line with the door. At that point, he could hear somebody start pulling on the handle like they were trying to come in, and Ethan instantly yelled out, "I'm in here." As soon as he yelled that out, a voice yelled back to him, "We don't care." At this point, Ethan was starting to get pretty freaked out because he had nothing to protect himself with. He knew that he did not have a firearm, he did not have his bow, and what made it even worse was the fact that he did have a pack that had his knife and his bear spray. However, that knife and the bear spray were sitting on the back of the quad. He forgot to bring it into the trailer with him. Ethan knew he was not in a good situation. He had no weapons, completely unarmed, and those two guys were trying to get into the trailer. So he decided at this point that he would just bluff and tell them that he had a firearm. So he yelled out that I have a firearm, and those guys just laughed at him and said basically, no, you don't. And then they proceeded to periodically bang on the side of the trailer with what sounded like almost like a baseball bat or a tree branch. They just kept hitting the side of the trailer, walking around the entire thing, and basically just kept mocking him the entire time. That went on for about a half an hour, and then they were periodically be hitting on the windows, pulling on the doors, and at one point the one side window just came imploding in, shooting shards of glass all over Ethan. At this point, he knew he had to do something. He could not just sit in here all night, because sooner or later these guys would get in. And he knew that on the back of his quad, that's where his knife was and his bear spray, if these guys did not already have it. And he figured if those items were still there, that would be his best source of defense. That would be his best way out of this situation. So he kind of gathered up his courage. He waited until he could hear one of the guys on the far side of the trailer and the other guy towards the back. Then he made his way up towards the door. He unlocked it and got ready to book it out the door. As he's standing there up against the door, he's listening for that guy towards that back corner of the trailer to move around the back side. As soon as he hears the guy go around that corner, he quickly pushes against the door and sprints the 15 yards to where his quad was. As soon as that door, though, flung open and hit the side of the trailer, he heard the two guys start screaming at him, and then he could hear them running along the side of the trailer up towards the front. Ethan booked it directly towards his quad. Once he got to the quad, he saw that his pack was still sitting on the back. He reached for it, pulled his bear spray out of the side pocket, removed the safety tab, and quickly swung around. At this point, he could see those two guys running directly towards him, and one of them did have a bat. And as soon as they were about 10 yards from him, he just quickly sprayed at both of them with his bear spray. Both men instantly started screaming and basically dropped to the ground holding their eyes. Ethan instantly took advantage of the fact that both these guys were now partially incapacitated. He reached into his pack, he pulled out a couple of zap straps, and then he ran over to the first guy. Right as he got to him, he gave him a real quick, swift kick to the side of the head, kind of knocked the guy down onto the ground. He ran to the second guy, forced him down onto his stomach, grabbed his arms, put him behind his back, and then he zap strapped his hands behind his back. Once that guy was secured, he made his way back over to the first guy, and he did the same thing to him. He then grabbed the bat, stood over top of them, and just basically every time they would try to get up, he would just basically push them back to the ground, whether he would just use his foot and kick them down, push them with his hands, or kind of give them a light hit with the bat. Once that initial shock, that initial pain from the bear spray wore off on these guys and they were actually able to see and kind of stop screaming, Ethan told them that if they tried to get up, he was going to beat them with the bat, and if they liked their teeth the way they were, they would just stay on the ground. Ethan ended up spending all night standing over these guys, and again, every time they would go to move, he would just take the bat, hold it up, basically striking fear into them so that these guys were just too scared to move at that point. He stood like that all night, all through the morning, and the next morning at around 10 o'clock, Nick was making his way down that driveway, and as soon as he turned that last corner, the first thing he saw was his brother standing there holding a bat, and sees the trailer just completely beat up. It's completely full of dents. The one window shattered out. And then he notices there's two men bound on their stomachs at his brother's feet. He immediately stops the truck, gets out, runs over to his brother to find out what's going on. And as soon as Ethan told him what had happened, Nick turned around, ran back to the truck, And then he came back with his 12 gauge pump action shotgun. He handed it to Ethan, told him, "You watch them. I'm going to head back to Hudson Bay and I'm going to bring the RCMP back with me." So Nick got in his truck, took off, and Ethan just stood there with the shotgun in hand watching over these two guys. About 45 minutes later, Nick returned with an RCMP constable. The constable ended up arresting the two guys that had been harassing Ethan. And it came to turn out that those two guys, the reason that they were snooping around the camp was they had saw them pull in there the day before with the quad on the trailer behind the truck. And then they had seen Nick's truck leave that afternoon without the quad, and they came onto the property in hopes to try to steal that quad. And it just so turned out that they noticed that trailer and thought that there might be some items of value inside of there, and they were not counting on somebody actually being in there, and they swore that, you know, they were just trying to scare him and that they wouldn't hurt him. But Ethan really does not buy that. He really believes that if those two guys would have got into the trailer, it could have ended incredibly badly for him. Well, that's it for today's stories. Guys, please let me know in the comments if these type of stories are something that you would like to see periodically added to the channel. So please leave a comment in the comment section. And if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.